Thanks for tuning in to TellyCast. Before you listen to the show, I wanted to let you know about our next content industry event, the TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios. It takes place at BFI South Bank in London on the 30th of November. The first event of its kind in the UK, it will create an environment for producers, podcasters, brands, media agencies, platforms and the wider content industry to gather, learn, debate and share insight on the business opportunities in the fast-developing world of digital-first content. Panel sessions during the day are designed to provide actionable insights and will focus on production, development, community building, IP, formats and brand-funded social content. Speakers include senior execs from Meta, BBC Studios, Lad Bible Group, Channel 4, Future Studios, Audio Boom, The Sidemen, Jungle Creations and more to be announced. The lineup also features top creators, including YouTube star Joe Sugg and Danny Robbins, creator of podcast-turned-TV series The Battersea Poltergeist. And our moderators include Creatorville's Sam Barcroft and former YouTube Originals Commissioner and Executive Producer Luke Hyams. Tickets are strictly limited and only available at telecast.com/events. TellyCast listeners can also get an extra £20 off the ticket price by using the promo code TellyCast+. We'll see you there.
TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to the final TellyCast of 2022. We're rounding off the year with a deep dive into the world of artificial intelligence with Oxford University lecturer and media expert Dr Alex Connock. We're discussing the impact AI has had so far on the content industry and what we can expect in the future as the technology starts to land with wider audiences on a seemingly ever-increasing basis. Alex also has some tips on how you can play around with some of the latest text-to-image and copywriting tools. It's coming right up on this week's End of the Year TellyCast. My guest for this last show of 2022 is Dr Alex Connock, lecturer at St Hugh's College, Oxford, director of the Oxford Postgraduate Diploma in Artificial Intelligence for Business at Saïd Business School, and head of Department for Creative Business at the UK's National Film and TV School. Welcome to the show, Alex. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you for having me, Justin. Yeah, it's great to be here.
I was looking at your, not only at your CV, but also your book, and that we're going to be talking about in a second. A really fascinating subject that a lot of people are starting to talk about, which is artificial intelligence and the application of technology within the media industry. And specifically, we're going to be talking a little bit about the TV industry and content industry side of that. Before we do so, and before your academic career, you had a pretty wide range of experience in the commercial side of the content industry. Can you talk us through that, first of all?
Yeah, so I started in the media very much in the analog era. So I left. I went to Oxford as an undergraduate and then left and went to America at Columbia University and then went straight into magazines. So I worked for People magazine, which was then the biggest magazine in the world. And it was a printed magazine, obviously. And I was given all these kind of jobs that you get in the movies, like going on the road with Metallica or, in the sort of late 80s around Germany when no one had heard of them. And I was once given the assignment of going across America with Donald Trump and Michael Jackson, which I'm still dining out on now. And of course, for the first 15 years of the life of that post-dinner party anecdote, Michael Jackson was the sort of best sort of selling point. And now, of course, it's flipped to Donald Trump. I'm not sure what best selling point is quite the way of putting it. But certainly, yeah, I had an analog media career. And then in the 90s, I worked in some of the kind of more sort of fashionable TV shows like The Word and The Big Breakfast. I was the sort of accidental producer of The Word's episode when Nirvana made their first ever TV appearance. I literally had no idea who they were. They were booked by Joe Wiley, who certainly did know who they were. And, I was just the kind of guy writing the script. Around the turn of the millennium, I started a production company called 10 Alps with Bob Geldof, which span out of Planet 24 when it was bought by ITV, Planet 24 having been the production company for The Big Breakfast and the Word. 10 Alps grew very, very fast, and we acquired a lot of factual TV production companies, some really good ones like Blakeway and Brook Lapping, and got very big, actually. And so I was able to participate in the kind of first wave of the independent TV scene in the UK between 2000 and 2011 or so with this company 10 Alps, which, you know, made lots of documentaries, factual entertainment programs, some drama, lots of radio, and also had some sort of publishing activities. And all of that was kind of just as the internet was really getting going. But it was long before the dawn of artificial intelligence, which we're going to come on and talk about. And then after I left 10 Alps, I then went to work for a group called Shine, which then became Endemol Shine, running their northern production company, which was, again, a fascinating experience in show creation. And during that time, the internet was really roaring along. So we would make lots of commercials for digital distribution. I worked briefly at the Lad Bible, helping them with some video, and really got to know the sort of digital advertising landscape as it was at the time, and social distribution. So I had, a pretty rich experience and some good experiences across the board in UK and US media. And I think they've all stood me in reasonably good stead for the world that we now find ourselves in. Except, unfortunately, that world is completely changed. So now we have a world where all the traditional verticals of what we used to think of as the media, TV, film, music, news, all those verticals have been kind of smashed up to a certain extent. And so we have to kind of start again with a blank sheet of paper and say, what is the media that we're now describing? Because it's a very different place.
What is it that drew you towards academia then, in moving from the commercial sector into the roles that you have now at various different academic institutions within the content industry?
Yeah, so whilst I'd been in content, I'd had a slightly fetishistic degree collecting side hobby. So I managed to amass 4 degrees by the time I sort of left TV. One at a business school called INSEAD, one at Columbia in New York, and one at Oxford, and so forth. And I just loved academia. And so I thought, well, let's take a pivot. Let's really give it a go. And so I did pivot into academia, which is sort of not quite as easy as one might think it might be in some ways, but really rewarding and a very different but pretty fabulous place. The great paradox in my life now is that even though I'm not in TV, across my desk come more good ideas for TV shows than ever did when I was actually in TV, because now you get to see them in their kind of raw, unalloyed academic research state, and you're constantly seeing these fabulous ideas for shows that you sort of think, I need to go and try and get them made because they're so different and so original from what's being made on TV at the moment. I think AI, and that my interest in AI probably falls into that category actually, because the moment I started seeing it at Oxford in about 2017, I realized that this was going to be the thing that was going to really define media in probably the 2020s and beyond.
It's certainly a fascinating subject, and I think it's becoming more and more prevalent, or certainly, becoming more and more commercialized. But just taking a step back from that then, so we're discussing your new book on media management and artificial intelligence. First of all, tell us about the book overall and its aims.
Yeah, so the book's called Media Management and Artificial Intelligence. It's published by Routledge. You can find it just by searching Alex Connock if you want to read it, which would be great. So I found myself co-running and now running an AI program at Oxford a couple of years ago. And I instantly spotted that it was going to come like a train into media. But when I pitched it to the publishers, Routledge, they were kind of reasonably interested, but they then sort of farm any pitch they get for an academic book out to a body of kind of sort of established academics. And I saw the feedback and it was incredibly negative. It was like, why would we want to know about this? And this doesn't fit any of the textbook models of how we think about media. And why should we do a book about media management and artificial intelligence? And he hasn't even mentioned print publishing and so forth. And it was quite evident to me that there was a kind of rather 20th century view prevalent in the academic world of what the media business really is. And that view was quite dissociated from how the media business had actually evolved. And I think you can probably tell that story through the prism of Netflix. So back in 2007, as you know, Netflix was a sort of mail distributed sort of DVD company, essentially. And it had this kind of vague scatterbrain notion that it was going to launch a streaming service. And all its traditional rivals were highly skeptical. And so you had Blockbuster famously barely taking the meeting with Netflix and refusing the opportunity to buy the company for 50 million. You allegedly had HBO, the sort of premium US cable channel, not even taking the meeting, supposedly. And so nobody really got Netflix and what its vision was. But of course, core to that vision, even in 2007, was the idea of recommendation engines or recommendation algorithms, which are machine learning, artificial intelligence, ultimately. And those algorithms probably went on to define why Netflix became the default streaming service right across the 2010s, and why even now it's probably still the kind of agenda-setting streaming service in the industry because of its knowledge of artificial intelligence. So Netflix is the company that gives you the personalized homepage, which is probably the defining attribute of a viewing experience on Netflix. And so that was really the first time that AI in any form had become current in the media. And in fact, Netflix didn't just use it for recommendation, they also use it for streaming, for bandwidth management, so that they can cram more data down the pipe and get data to you without buffering and so forth, which is still going on today at Netflix and many other places. So the first time we really saw AI in the media was probably Netflix.
I'm going to ask you a slightly stupid question. Is AI and an algorithm one and the same thing, essentially? I mean, when we talk about algorithms, is every algorithm AI driven?
No, actually, if you looked at your daily life, you have algorithms for all sorts of things. The algorithms are just methods by which you shortcut a decision-making process. They're sort of simple formula, if you like, where you make a decision, is it cold, therefore I'll wear a coat? That's an algorithm, ultimately. Or I think we're talking here about much more sophisticated algorithms, which are designed to parse, P-A-R-S-E, to examine information in such a way as to reduce a very complicated data set to a methodology that can be replicated and scaled in such a way that we can make useful decisions properly in ways that human beings alone couldn't make those decisions. So that's a pretty loose definition, but algorithms are everywhere, but we're talking about particular AI algorithms which are capable of really taking vast amounts of data and turning them into useful decision making. And sometimes decision making, by the way, which we can't even understand. And that's one of the fascinating things about AI is that there are black box algorithms where an insurance decision is being taken or a weapon is being fired where you don't even necessarily know why that decision has been taken. It's just taken on the basis of past information and some statistical relationships have been identified, but may not have ever been written down.
So you mentioned Netflix as perhaps the best known AI algorithm that we're all sort of interfacing with on a regular basis. In terms of the overall media industry, where do you think we're up to when it comes to AI and its development? And, what are the other major impacts has it had to date in terms of examples that we might be aware of and also perhaps others that we're not aware of, as you say?
Yeah, so I think there's probably been three distinct phases in terms of the relationship between the media and AI. And that first phase was probably the 2007 onwards development of various different recommendation tools that at different platforms were used in different ways to define how we were served individually pieces of content. And of course, that was a much bigger picture of what was going on in e-commerce, whereby we were being increasingly offered digital advertising that was hypothecated on our own pre-expressed or pre-observed predilections. Recommendation was the first, 2007. Around the period sort of 2017 onwards, we started to see AI tools creeping into the kind of back door of the kind of back end of TV post-production and to a certain extent production. So it had gone from the distribution phase, which is, if you think about it, the very last phase of the lifespan of a piece of media, now into the production phase. And you were seeing it creeping into podcast software, video software of many kinds, photography software. But it was very much a production tool. And again, it was somewhat under the radar. It wasn't really being observed in the wild. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that people within the sort of industry and certainly within the academic study of the industry still hadn't really woken up to it. And then now, in 2021 to 2, particularly 22, and in fact, particularly the end of 22 where we are now, you've seen this third and really quite radical phase of generative AI tools. So this is where the deep learning and generative adversarial networks, as they're called, are used to create content from scratch, or apparently from scratch, so or certainly as a sort of reiteration of vast amounts of training data, to provide a completely new way for media content to be created. And I think that's probably one of the big moments in media history. So if you do a quick recap of, the history of the media, probably, 1436, the invention of the printing press, which enabled printed content to be disseminated at far greater scale than it had hitherto been. Then into the 19th century, 1839, the invention of photography. Then 1895, the moving image. Then moving into the 20th century, radio in the 1920s, TV in the late 1920s, early 1930s, but not really breaking through until the 1950s. Internet, 1990s, but now generative AI. And you might say, well, why would we attribute that much significance to this kind of geeky invention of generative AI? It's because it's enabling people to do quite extraordinarily revolutionary things, like say a simple phrase and see that iterated as a picture or a piece of audio, and very soon a piece of video, a piece of meaningful video. And so AI has suddenly broken the surface. And now, going back to that skeptical academic committee who looked at my book, a couple of years ago, that would never be the case now. Everyone all over the media, the news, every day in the news, there is a story about generative AI and how it's broken through. And we're seeing those tools. And I think, I think you've probably played with them, haven't you?
I've been playing around with a couple of AI platforms over the last couple of weeks. I mean, first of all, these are Sam Barcroft. If you follow Sam on Twitter, he's often playing around with various different bits of AI, and one of them is Midjourney. And similarly to what you just mentioned, being able to enter text into a box and seeing the most incredibly detailed fantasy artwork created from any collection of words that you put in. And obviously it's not any collection. You start to learn that, maybe if I put, super high definition or depth of field or various different search terms into, I don't know, chicken, astronaut, and, whatever other search term, you can put it all in. You have amazing fun with it and create the most extraordinary imagery. And I've also been playing with Jasper as well, which is essentially a text-based AI engine that develops text based upon, I might put in search terms that, write an article on this subject in the style of a particular journalist or a style of a particular newspaper. And you can define how long that article is. And you just start to see that, these products now, because they are becoming into the mainstream. I mean, some of these products are, incredibly affordable and they're going to scale. So I'm sort of dipping my toe into this area, and it starts to open your mind to the opportunities it will open up for the content industry. We're now seeing content creators and tools becoming open to content creators. What do you think the opportunities are that AI will open up for content creators, first of all?
Well, so you're seeing a number of different companies, many of them coming out of San Francisco, which I suppose is sort of traditional trope. And Midjourney that you mentioned is a San Francisco-based company. And there's another even better known one called OpenAI, which is part owned by Microsoft and was started by a guy called Sam Altman. And about a year and a half ago, OpenAI launched a product called GPT-3, which was a large model, which was first iterated really as a creator of language. So a language creator, which enabled people to, as you say, put inputs in and generate credible language back. And then that was reiterated early in 22 as a model called DALL-E, and then DALL-E 2, which was capable of creating imagery. And at the time, that was in the summer of 2022, we were seeing what we thought was tremendous imagery. And there's some really famous examples. So there was a medieval painting of the Wi-Fi not working, where you got this kind of ersatz medieval tapestry with that kind of Wi-Fi symbol. There was an ancient Egyptian painting of people arguing about who was going to take out the trash and so forth. And at the time, that was considered very cutting edge. So that took us through the summer of 22, and it became possible for the everyday person to get effectively a license, a free license to use DALL-E 2, and you started seeing people iterating stuff. But I think even at that time, the imagery was good, but not photorealistic. And what it was quite good at was reiterating different styles, across the ages. So you could put, the Mexican artist for various, shoppers at Tesco, whatever it was, and it would give you a pretty pretty good image of that. Or you could do a constable or whatever, it was good at that. But it wasn't photorealistic. And then as we've moved into the autumn, you did indeed get this system Midjourney, which is fantastically good at iterating different styles. And what you've entered into now is a period where it's really become about the art of the prompt. So the creation of media is not so much about sort of original creation as coming up with a sophisticated prompt by which you will encourage the system to create something of which you'd like. That may be as simple as, give me a Victorian image of a man standing outside a railway station, but actually it might be as many as 20 lines of prompt, in terms of which type of photography to replicate and what kind of lens to use and whether there are scratches or not and many other sort of parameters. It's those prompts that have started to yield these really, truly incredible pieces of artwork, which pose any number of challenges. There's also another system which is actually London-based called Stable Diffusion, run by a guy called Emad Mostak, who's a very kind of evangelical figure in this world. And all these companies are moving with astonishing speed. So almost every day now, new products based on one or other of those platforms are being released to every kind of sort of micro facet of how you could create media companies and how you create media products. You're seeing art of all kinds iterated in still imagery by one or other of those systems. There's also a second dimension to this, which is now video is starting to come on stream. So Meta, the company behind Facebook, have done quite a lot of sort of quasi-academic research on this and have published some quite interesting papers on it. So they've started to put out essentially text-to-video imagery now, which is still pretty rudimentary, but is starting to gain a bit of traction. Stable Diffusion are doing that. I interviewed Emad Mostak the other day, and he was saying that he thinks that in 5 years' time, it will be possible to obtain a new high-definition series of Game of Thrones with a simple one-line verbal prompt, like give me a series of this in which so-and-so happens, and that becomes the series. And you might have thought that was ludicrous even 6 weeks ago, but actually I think people are starting to think maybe it isn't ludicrous and maybe that's really, really possible. And so such is the speed of this development and such is the kind of virtuosity of the technology that now everyday people have got stuck in and got involved in this. And so a lot of these systems are maxing out. And so there've been occasions when you simply haven't been able to get onto them because the consumer at large is starting to use them. There are literally millions of people using them and literally dozens of new tools per day being released. And I don't think, going back to that earlier question about media career and so forth, I don't think I've seen a time in the media this febrile since probably 2001 with the kind of early days of the internet, which were similar in respect of a new .com as it was then, business being launched every day, each new paradigm representing some new part of society that was being replicated. Going beyond that, of course, we now have text as well. So we have what I previously mentioned as OpenAI's GPT-3 system, which was a sort of fairly formal interaction where you would sort of determine what kind of text you wanted and put it in, and it would give you something back. And that's using a technology called natural language processing. ChatGPT, which is also based on GPT-3 or GPT 3.5 actually, has become released. And that has gone absolutely ballistic in probably the last week alone. And you've probably seen, you referred to Sam Barcroft, who I know and who very kindly has come visit us at the National Film School as well. Everyone I know pretty much is playing with that system because it is phenomenally entertaining. So you've seen the kind of classics of the genre. There's the biblical verse in the style of the King James Bible explaining how to remove a peanut butter sandwich from a VCR, for example. Yeah. There's, people having a friend of mine who works in government, said, asked it, how do we avoid a nuclear war? It's like, and someone did, write a song to my sister apologizing for the fact that my pet giraffe has eaten all her vegetables in the style of a disco classic. A friend of mine had it comment on computer code that he's written, but in the style of a pirate. It's hilarious. And what it's doing, of course, is plumbing the depths of having read, to all intents and purposes, the entire internet and working out, to put it in sort of layman's terms, to working out after any given word, what's the most statistically likely word to follow and turning that into apparently credible text. Interestingly, that text may not always be right. So Sam Altman himself, the founder behind OpenAI, has said, don't use this text for kind of medical interventions or for, key critical computer code or whatever, because some of it might be wrong, but nonetheless, it's a very credible wrong. And that system, again, takes us back to the earlier point that I made about the text to picture AIs, which is it's becoming about the art of the prompt. And so content creation very rapidly has gone from the art of true human innovation at some sort of purist level, or at least that's the way we would like to think. We can come back to that now into, how does the human work with this AI or this augmented intelligence via the prompt to create something new? And that opens up a whole field of debate, copyright challenge, legal challenge, metaphysical, questioning, which will probably occupy the media for the rest of the 2020s. And that sort of anonymous body of academics who didn't want to publish my book, 2 years ago, that they now have to engage because this is the way the media is going to be constructed going forward.
It is absolutely fascinating to hear you talking about, text to video, because that's, clearly where my thoughts were going after being able to create, the most amazing artworks, still images. So now if we're talking about create a hit sitcom like Friends, but not like Friends, or certain, as you say, certain prompts, certain script writers, maybe certain actors, that may be possible at some time to actually create TV series or documentaries, or, whether it's scripted or unscripted content purely through prompt. Is that what you see as being possible?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you think that's where we're going then?
100%. I think there's quite a lot of people who think that as well. So people are saying, for example, welcome to the era of endless media, whereby I could have an endless number of episodes of Friends because I could ask the system to just make me more and more of them. There are those who say that human created content may actually become a rarity because it's so much harder for a human to create an image than, or an episode of Friends than it will ultimately be for a computer to create one. But I don't think that means, or anyone thinks that means, the death of human creativity. Quite the contrary. And in fact, this is arguably nothing new. So Picasso said, "Good artists copy and great artists steal." And I think what he probably meant by that, if I could sort of put my own sort of clumsy words into his mouth, is there isn't really a period in human history or the history of creativity where pure creativity was emerging without it being based at some level in the training data set of what was being done around the artist. So if Michelangelo is a beautiful artist, but was very much in the context of Renaissance Italy and all the other artists working in Renaissance Italy. Mozart was working in the context of late 18th century Vienna, and his work sounds a lot like a lot of other composers from late 18th century Vienna. He's better, but it's very much in the same vernacular. So it's always been the case that creativity has at some level been determined by the training data around it. And there's nothing new in that respect about AI. It's just that it's being done by a machine instead by a human. So that's one interesting consideration. Another one is that if AI is only ever really working, albeit very cleverly, on the training data set of what's previously been created, then one could argue that it will never truly be original, and it will still be down to the humans with our particular wiring to come up with that creativity. So it's in fact the case in show business that series get cancelled after 3 series because they stop having newness and they stop being interesting. And therefore, an AI that could continue to re-innovate Game of Thrones or whatever the sequence was called, that may not be that interesting in AI because ultimately what people really wanted was the newness of the new vision, that original vision of the series. And so there may still be a place for the human in all of this. It's just that the human will be doing the pure play creativity, the leaps of judgment that the systems probably aren't capable of doing. And then the other thing that's happening, of course, is that the whole notion of copyright and ownership has been thrown into disarray and it's yet to be fully solved. And from governments to law firms to creators to artists to art schools, that question is being developed around the world and discussed and has yet to be solved. It's not even agreed between continents what the solution should look like. So in America, they're coming out with one set of solutions. In Europe, they're coming up with others. And nobody has quite solved how you even think about the ownership of pieces of work created by AI systems, because there are 4 or 5 candidates who might credibly claim to own a picture created by a Midjourney.
That's going to be fascinating. And also for content creators who are now making shows for major media businesses, you should probably look at the small print about, what AI clauses a commissioning company or an acquiring company has got, because thinking about the Friends analogy we talked about earlier on, I mean, using AI, but also deepfake technology as well. Is there any reason why we can't, as you say, okay, let's create another 100 episodes of Friends, and we can not only, write the scripts, but we can actually shoot it with the original actors, essentially, or the digital components of the original actors. We might be a little way off that, but that's technically possible, isn't it?
Well, we're not a long way off it. If you take the actor copyright point, your last point, so James Earl Jones has indeed licensed his voice for the use of Darth Vader beyond his useful life, if I can put it like that. So his estate will control his voice even after he dies, with respect to Star Wars. To your earlier point, that there are so many dimensions to it, it's quite difficult to know where to start. But let's start with the copyright dimension. You mentioned Friends, and another 90s TV show we might think about would be South Park. And what was interesting there is that the guys who created South Park essentially kept back the digital rights to that show when they first sold it for $1 billion, even before the internet had really become a thing. And so they were visionary enough to know that there might ultimately be a time when the digital rights to this creation that they'd made would become valuable. So they were able to then resell it, even having previously sold it to TV, later on resell it again for digital, because they'd had that visionary approach to the sort of legal copyright side of it. And I think that same sort of issue is going to come up now, where crafty agents will very much try and keep back the rights to an AI reiteration of a piece of content, even before the technologies become available for that iteration to take place, because it might have some notional theoretical future value. But I come back to the point, who owns this stuff? So you might say, well, a buyout of all the actors in a show would determine that the show was therefore owned by the producer and not the actors. But as you say, if I'm going to reiterate new work, then would those actors not have a right to some form of payment for that new work? And actually, there was a legal case involving TikTok where a voiceover artist was able to take legal action against TikTok on the basis that supposedly that new content had been created using her voice without her permission. And the case settled. I don't know how or why the case settled, but it did settle. And that might suggest that she had a point to some level, that actually as an actor, she had given her voice and her permission implicitly and explicitly for one piece of content, and when another one was created, she ought to be repaid for it. And actually, if you look it up, the actors' unions in the UK Equity has already been onto this, and has already taken a position that synthetic voice reiterations of pieces of acted work should be subject to further payment. And that's just a tiny microcosm of what is going to take place across the landscape of media as the reiteration via the training data set created, accidentally, but automatically when you make something, creates the possibility that there'll be new content out there that you have to legislate for and have to try and figure out the ownership of. So it's a very, very tricky and interesting problem. Another problem is that the artists might say, well, I don't want to be reiterated. And I never willingly entered that bargain in the first place. And so there's an artist called Greg Bukowski who has become the most fashionable artist to use as a prompt on Midjourney. And so, and Stable Diffusion, I believe. If you look at that kind of sci-fi art, slightly League of Legends art that you find on a lot of those discords around the content that people are creating, a lot of it owes the design ethic to Greg Bukowski. And his point is, I didn't sign up for that. And even though those new pieces of art are at some level new, they are determined by the style that I created and effectively copyrighted. And I don't want that to happen. And so now the owners of these systems are getting asked to take out the possibility that certain artists' names can be used in prompts so as to protect the copyright of those artists. And that's an area of dispute. It hasn't necessarily been proved yet, but it's a really fascinating future area of debate. And then finally, there's this idea of kind of AI as the creator, and will we have to have awards shows and Oscars in the future for content created by AI versus, quote unquote, real content, then you might say, well, that's very future facing and sort of a bit sort of Wired magazine and not very serious. But actually, there is an AI film festival in New York in February, so it's already happening. That issue is live. Meanwhile, in America, it's actually the case that you can't copyright a piece of AI art, and there's sort of a fascinating article in the FT where the US Copyright Office makes the point that it wouldn't allow a piece of art created by an elephant to be copyright, and it won't allow a piece of art created by an AI to be copyright either. It puts it in the same category as an elephant. So there's many, many areas to solve here, but these issues are going to have to get solved because this is a very real and live area.
I mean, like we discussed earlier on, it feels like it's accelerating, certainly towards the end of 2022, in terms of the mainstream consumer starting to discover it and play with it and see what they can create. Now, putting this back to the TV industry again and just thinking about the business of TV then, I actually met with Mo Banani, who's an executive from a company called DreamSpark at MIPCOM this year, and he was using AI in order to essentially identify the right buyers for shows. So all the data set that he was getting was, all the commissions that a particular broadcaster had made and, the success of those commissions, but, when it came to audience figures, then leading him towards the ideal new format and the ideal new content and the ideal buyer for that content. Do you think that AI on the business side, what do you think are going to be the major breakthroughs in the next year? Because everyone's looking for an edge, aren't they? Everyone's looking for that extra 10%, that advantage to help them and their business and speed up, it may becoming more efficient, etc. So how do you think the application when it comes to the business of TV is going to change things in the next year, for example?
Yeah, well, I think that's your basic recommendation algorithm that people would recognize from their e-commerce experience, the kind of You Might Also Like or People Also Bought algorithm that you would find on, Misguided or Pretty Little Thing, and it's just being applied to TV purchasing, and I'm sure it makes sense. So that's one end of the spectrum, which I'm sure will become current. I think we could probably all agree that the business of the management of the rights of TV shows has always been very difficult. I've been at multiple companies where people tried to, in some way, digitize and mechanize the multiple stakeholders in TV shows, such that when they sold the version to Australia, they knew how many royalties to pay to the the guy who played the policeman in episode 3, and that's always been very difficult. And to the degree that tools like AI and sort of wider digital transformation can help that happen, that's fantastic. If you had a recommendation layer on top, that's going to be fantastic too. I think there are some people who would tell you that the trade in international TV dramas and formats will probably remain quite a human and people-based trade for quite a long time, because ultimately, buying the next potential hit music show is as much about the producer as the kind of the digital technology of the show or any degree to which you might even turn it into an algebra. It's always quite a sort of creative and human driven activity. And it's a very B2B kind of human sales process. I think right at the other end of the spectrum, you earlier mentioned deepfakes. And I was quite pleased in a way we managed to go 45 minutes without mentioning deepfakes, because that's the kind of trope that always comes up when you talk about this. But I think synthetic humans, which is a sort of ethics loaded version of deepfakes, is going to become very real in TV and advertising, actually. So you'll find that advertisers are able to create, 100 versions of a TV commercial with slightly tweaked characters in them according to their perceived tastes of the different segments of audience, different ethnicities, for example, which opens up another area of ethical challenge. And then within TV creation itself, you'll find AI technologies moving into the creation of ever more fantastical worlds for virtual studios and actual synthetic humans, which of course we've already seen in any number of ways. So we've seen the synthetic humans created for characters and non-playing characters in the games industry via Unreal Engine. That's only going to grow. We're seeing virtual influencers in the UK or US, South Korea, very famously in South Korea and Japan. We've seen deep fake humans in Kendrick Lamar videos. We've seen 15 million synthetic humans removed from LinkedIn. So we're starting to see the arrival of the synthetic human. And I think there's probably going to be a creative breakthrough in TV such that at some point in the 2020s, someone is essentially going to do what they call a Turing test, which is whereby the Turing test is essentially Alan Turing, as I'm sure you know, was the sort of UK mathematician who was famously responsible, but actually part for cracking the Nazi codes and went on to become one of the kind of founding fathers of AI. And he had this test called the Turing test, which in essence came down to if you can't tell it's a machine, then it's passed the Turing test. And I think someone will probably come up with, a version of Blind Date where there are 3 contestants, but only one of them is real. And if you pick the actual real one, then you get to go on a date with them or whatever. And it's quite interesting. Every time I've done a lecture recently to TV people, I've afterwards been approached by kind of 4 or 5 development people who've gone, oh, we really want to do an AI idea. We love that idea. And I think you'll probably find people are pitching quite a lot of ideas now into UK TV channels and doubtless beyond, which are founded at some level on the Turing test. It's like, can we put fake characters into these shows in such a way that their fakeness becomes an issue or becomes a sort of question mark or something to spot and so forth. So I think across the TV landscape, from both the sales technology that you mentioned earlier right through to the creative technology and the recommendation as it's finally distributed, these AI tools are sort of beginning to imbue themselves in the sort of firmament. There's one interesting conversation I had. I talked to somebody in Silicon Valley who was running one of the really big national security AI systems, where he rather spookily told me that he'd ingested all the world's content, which is kind of okay, that if you imagine that a system which is all the digital content in the whole world. But he said that he'd had to identify content created pre-2021 and content created post-2021 because the post-2021 content could be synthetic. And so we're going to be dealing with a world in future where we have 2 bodies of content that we know to be real and kind of analog in sort of old way of referring to it, and then content that might be AI created. That opens up another whole dimension of sort of mystical wonderings that we wish we could get into. It's everywhere. It's everywhere and it's brilliant. And one of the things I did in my book is I just literally listed all the ways AI is changing each category of the media industry. And some of it's quite prosaic, but sort of brilliant. So there's a company in Hollywood, for example, that has used machine learning and AI to work out how to revoice shows in such that the actor, whatever language they're speaking, looks like they're really speaking that language and is speaking it in their own voice. So the example they have is Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump talking Mandarin and his lips moving in Mandarin. And you see that and you think that's going to change everything in the sort of international TV market, because now drama, wherever it's made, will appear to be eponymously in your home language, not just as a matter of clunky dubbing, but actually as the actual actor's voice being used and the actor's lips moving in sync with that voice. And you think, well, that will have a really profound cultural implication, because it'll mean that people are able to access much more sort of fluid sources of drama from around the world, continuing a trope that's already started with kind of Squid Game and Money Heist, but actually will mean that there might be more sort of cultures might talk to each other more, actually, because so it might have a positive impact, So I think this is a wonderful field. In whichever corner of it you delve into, you find examples of little tools that are being used. And also at the most meta level, you realize that the very essence of what the challenge of making TV is or making film is going to change too. It's very rare that you get a revolution that fundamental at that many different levels, all of them simultaneous. And I think the big insight we had at Oxford is that AI isn't really a subject at all, like zoology or psychology or something. It's just a tool that gets applied to every other subject and revolutionizes it, and that's sort of fascinating.
Do you think the TV industry, and I'm specifically saying the TV industry, not the wider digital content industry, but let's just talk about the more traditional linear TV industry. Do you think it's reached its peak now in terms of human employees?
Good question. I don't know that I do think that, actually. I think that one could argue, in the UK at least, this is a booming industry with ever more employees and ever more skills involved in its creation and ever more audience traction around the world. So no, I'm pretty optimistic about the TV industry. And I think that if you look at the recent waves of technology, such as Unreal Engine or Virtual Studio, the UK, since we're in the UK, has shown that it's able to employ and monetize those technologies to great effect. And it isn't at all the case that now that we have virtual studios, we don't have to have set builders, or we don't have to have people working in studios anymore, and it's just a man or woman standing in front of a computer screen. Quite the contrary. If you were to attend the set of The Mandalorian, you'd find 300 people there, even though there's a screen the size of a tennis court projecting an image behind the actor. So no, I don't think we've reached peak TV. And I think now that the text to video generation race is on, as the State of AI report put this year, I think we will find ever more people involved in this industry, and it becoming ever more pivotal to the society we live in.
What led me to thinking about that question was, for example, in scripted, writers' rooms are typically quite expensive and time-consuming processes when it comes to writing additional episodes, adapting a novel or whatever that might be, based upon the original material of a novelist or a writer. So all of that application, you would think AI could, with perhaps an AI editor or an AI guide to run through that, could probably do that work right now when it's writing a particular screenwriting. I mean, we're presumably going to see that, because that seems to be not a fantastical leap in the future. That technology is kind of here now, is only improving literally on a daily basis.
Yeah, so there's a couple of relevant bits of software there. There's a company that's been around for a while in Hollywood called Synalytic, who claim to be able to have a system read a script and come back to you with whether that script is going to be commercially successful or not, based on the beats and the characters, and it's based on essentially benchmarking it against the training data set of all past hit movies. I think there's a challenge in that, is that I think it's almost inevitable that a movie that is exactly replicating the past hit movies won't be a hit movie, because one of the things that really truly defines a hit is that it should be original in some way. So I think there's a fascinating philosophical conundrum there. There's also very recently, as in this week, people using language models to generate scripts. So there's actually a piece of academic research out this week, co-writing screenplays and theatre scripts with language models and evaluation by industry professionals. And that's driven by a company called DeepMind, which is a very well-known sort of pure AI research company in London that was famously bought by Google for 300 million when it had never sold anything. So powerful was its technology and skill set. So yes, people are looking at both the analysis of scripts and indeed the creation of scripts from an AI perspective. But I don't know whether I think that means the death of the writer's room, because I think that the best output of a writer's room would be the output which isn't delving into the training data set of previous writer's room outputs, but is in some way new, original, unique, and precisely observed. So I suspect we might be heading for a sort of hybrid world where the grunt work is being done by AI, but the really clever work is being done by humans. And actually, we're already seeing that iterated in the newspaper industry, whereby sports reports, business news are being written by AI systems now, but then the human editors are looking over them and checking them, and also writing the more analytic material. And you can sort of see that at large in the Financial Times, in a way, where every single story that Financial Times publishes now is simultaneously available as synthetically voiced content. That isn't meaning that the analytical quality of that FT's output is declining. Quite the contrary. It probably just means that journalists are able to do the more thinking work, and the machines are going to do the more mechanistic work. It's too often when people refer to AI, they put a picture of a robot in the story and have a sort of dystopian, all our jobs are going to go.
And there's a fear, isn't there? There's a natural fear, I suppose, when, the machines are taking over our jobs.
I don't see any evidence of that at the moment, actually. I almost see the evidence of the opposite, which is that the next generation are going to embrace this technology and use it for ever more fantastical and entertaining work, and they're not going to have to do some of the more kind of grunt and rote work that they were previously having to do. I think there are some jobs, unfortunately, that will go. So, quite a lot of people in advertising think that the days of the storyboarding might be limited, for example, because as you mentioned at the outset of the conversation, you and I could go on Midjourney now and do photorealistic storyboard images in a specific style for a commercial in a matter of seconds, which would have cost 2 weeks of effort to make even 6 months ago. So some of those jobs are going to have to evolve, But I don't think at a sort of gross level, I think that the media is going to become less of an employer or less of an interesting place to work. And quite the contrary, I think it's probably going to become a more interesting place to work. We haven't mentioned video games yet, but, video games become ever more sophisticated and the characters within them become ever more autonomous, and the world creation becomes ever more fascinating and interesting.
What's occurring to me is that actually open-ended storytelling is perhaps going to become, central to content creation as well, where AI can help develop where a story goes, essentially. And you can maybe there's going to be the opportunity to choose your own story, choose your own journey within a TV series or certainly within a video game, which happens now to a certain extent in video gaming, but not so much in TV. But this whole sort of opportunity that Netflix has played with a little bit about open-ended stories or alternative endings or choose your own story, presumably that's going to be just something that's going to become more widespread.
It's funny that interactive storytelling, because I can remember that from going back to kind of the early 2000s. It's always been the dawn of the interactive story, whether it was CD-ROM or more latterly Black Mirror. And I've never seen it quite take off. It's still, if we're really honest, quite niche. And I wonder whether that it will remain thus in the sort of formal TV and film industries, and that whether people actually quite like having a singular linear storyline and sort of being served a version of reality. And I'm not sure people would necessarily want to always be interacting with it. Obviously, in the games world, it's very different. And you can see, across that industry, which is obviously a $180 billion turnover global industry. So pretty powerful, 7 times the size of the music industry. It was an interesting statistic I found. You can see in games that not only the interactivity, but also the kind of global scalability via multiplayer live play is only going to grow. And I think, NPCs, non-playing characters, becoming much more interactive and sort of holistic will become a key factor in that industry as well. So I think probably both will happen, actually. I think games will continue to evolve and continue to become more interactive, but I'm not sure that TV and film need to go down that road. And I think they may remain quite singular and quite sort of auteur-driven without needing to have 353 possibilities, or however many it was in Black Mirror's original piece. I think it was 350, for people to enjoy it. And I think it's quite interesting that you mentioned that Netflix have done it. They have done it, but they've only done like one a year, and no one else has done it. And that was probably 4 or 5 years ago, that particular Black Mirror episode, wasn't it? So, I don't know is the answer. I mean, I do think that, I kind of wish I was 20 again, because I think that the media for the next 20 years is going to be extraordinarily fascinating, because of all these technologies. Dramatron that enables you to write scripts with AI, but still input key points, 100 other technologies that are out today. This is going to be a great place to be. And I wouldn't want to leave people with the idea that their jobs are, it's sort of some sort of apocalyptic scenario whereby the jobs are all going to go and it's all going to be written by machines, because I think that would be very dystopian. And I'm not sure anyone would want to sit down in the evening to watch a bunch of entertainment purely created by machines without some sort of human storytelling, because that human storytelling is one of the most fundamental elements of being human at all, going right back to cave paintings. So this is a very existential period of change, but not one which we need to be alarmist about, and not one where we need to have pictures of robots and scary stories about deepfakes.
So for our listeners, Alex, then, before we wrap up, can you give us 1 or 2 different pointers in terms of anybody that hasn't, gone and played with AI in the way that we've been talking about? What recommendations would you get for people who've got no skills in this area whatsoever to jump in and have a play? Where should they go?
I'll give them one thing to think about, first of all, which is, do think about AI ethics, because it's extremely important. So even a year ago, if you looked online at synthetic humans, you would see that they were aging disproportionately to the way people actually age. So women, as they aged, were looking more and more like men. So if you ask an AI to create a synthetic human and show them aging, they would age like men. And you say, well, why is that? And the reason is because all the imagery on the internet, which was the training data set which these systems have been given, was very biased towards young women. And there just weren't any older women on the internet. So the training data apparently indicated that older people look like men. And so women were starting to look like men. there's countless, innumerable examples of AI accidentally showing bias. So, there have been bots that have, like, there was famously a Microsoft Tay bot that was trained to be a Nazi because it had been on Twitter for a day, and people just spouted Nazi propaganda at it, and so forth. And then there's awful examples of systems being very bad at recognizing diverse communities, and even civil rights, famous civil rights activists not being recognized even as the right sex in image recognition, for example. So there's a lot of ethical challenges around AI that all need to be solved. That would be an ever more important ongoing challenge. And so if I say to anyone who's using any of these systems, do be aware that you are dealing with a system that is only trained on the biases of the past. And it's a very good example. I went on all these systems and put, give me 4 pictures of Oxford professors, and every single picture was a white male. Now, you might say, well, that's because, unfortunately, Oxford professors are all white men. Not quite true, but statistically biased towards them for sure. But it's certainly not true that all Oxford professors should be white men. And so the world that AI spouts back at us is not necessarily the world we should be desiring. So anyone who has a kind of utopian vision that the AI is necessarily going to create some sort of perfect, balanced, fair world should really think again, and should think very carefully if they're creating any content about what training data are they using, and is that data at some level influencing the content that they're making, and is the world that they're creating reflective of the world as they would like it to be. So that might sound a bit preachy, but it's actually really important. And then the other thing I would say to people, just on the other end of the spectrum, is just go and have fun. There's a fantastic little newsletter called Ben's Bites. That's Ben the name, apostrophe S, Bites, Bites. And every day for about the past month, he's just listed some fun AI tools. But what's extraordinary is it's mushroomed in that month. So whereas on day one, he was like listing 3, now he's listing like 30 per day. It's just gone so fast, and his subscriber numbers have kind of risen exponentially. It's like it's some crazy graph, in a sort of sci-fi movie, as these tools are just multiplied across the board. And so go and play with the ones we've talked about, Midjourney, which you need to play with by Discord, which is slightly tricky to get into, but once you're there, it's really, really great.
Yeah, you need to download Discord, don't you, first of all? You need to, it's operated through Discord. So
exactly, yeah.
You can download that on your iPhone and operate it through that. But it's pretty straightforward. You can just Google it and get all that information pretty easily. And what else, Alex?
Yeah. Stable Diffusion is really good, and they're going very fast. And having met those guys, that's obviously a company that's here to stay. And I think if you think about these companies, OpenAI, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, they're probably the new generation of major players on the internet in the way that Google and Facebook were. I mean, they're probably going to be that powerful. I mean, the valuations are absolutely skyrocketing. So I think play with them, see what you can do. If you struggle to get the same kind of image resolution as you're seeing other people, basically, if you go on the Discord version of Midjourney, you can just nick other people's prompts. So you just look in the feed and see what other people are doing. It's all visible to you, and just kind of copy paste and then tweak it to whatever you want to do a picture of. And you will find that you will replicate their style, and you'll start to learn the vernacular of how people are getting these amazing prompts. Yeah. So just play with it. And then, so I think just look at all the different tools, look in your field. And I think that, if I was back at the beginning and I was interviewing researchers to, work on a TV show I would definitely say to them, have you looked at any AI tools in your space? Have you looked at workflow and how they can help? So, for example, in natural history, the BBC has developed machine learning tools which can, at scale, recognize animals in CCTV imagery, so that when they are doing Autumn Watch and they have 500,000 images coming in, they can find the exact 7 that show otters. And so that kind of thing is a really good workflow tool that people who are working in natural history program really need to know about now, because that's going to help them do better programming, So even if you don't think, I want to be an AI researcher, and, who does, really, if you just think about your little job and your little niche and how these tools can help you, I think that's probably a really good way of thinking about it.
And finally, Alex, we're at the end of the year. We're almost at the dawning of a new year. Give us a prediction, would you say, when it comes specifically to AI within the content industry? What do you think is going to be the major shift whether it's a product or it's a sector or an area that's going to most benefit from AI within the next 12 months?
Right. Okay. Well, there's so many. I think We haven't talked about national security and defense, but I think that we easily could have spent an hour talking about content just within that category and how important it's going to be in terms of disinformation, spotting deep fakes, analyzing content to figure out whether it's real or not. And actually, there was a piece of tech released yesterday which does indeed look at text and figure out whether it's AI created. So I think spotting synthetic content is going to become a huge issue, especially in the news industry. And I think synthetic humans are going to become a huge industry, both as a creative positive and also as a disruptor of all the models of how we use actors and talent going forward.
Alex, fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been really fascinating to speak to you. Media management and artificial intelligence, understanding media business models in the digital age is out now. It's maybe even a late Christmas present there that you can plump for. Have a wonderful festive period. Happy New Year. I'd love to have you on the show maybe next year, and we can chat about various developments that I'm sure we're going to see in the next 12 months.
Justin, I'm really grateful to you for having me. And as you can say, I'm sort of boringly passionate about it all, but I hope somewhere in everything we talked about, people find something interesting to go and look at. And you know, I really appreciate you for having me, and keep the good work up. It's a great show.
Well, that's about all for this week and for 2022. I've really enjoyed chatting with some fascinating guests this year and taking TellyCast out and about to the industry's biggest events, and also launching our own events too. There'll be more of that in 2023, so stay tuned. TellyCast has been brilliantly edited this year by Ian Chambers, and this week it was recorded in London. Our next show will be out on the 19th of January, so why not take a listen to some of our back catalogue with over 126 shows to choose from. Thanks for listening this year. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a peaceful and very happy holidays, and above all, stay safe.